Welcome to Snail Story, where love stories are told slowly, sincerely, and from the heart. How are you doing today? And hey, what city are you watching this from? In today's story, there's a quiet librarian who lives among old books. Someone who adores ancient domes and never imagined she'd step into the high-pressure world of modern architecture. And there's a successful CEO who thought he understood every blueprint in existence, since she appeared and changed everything. Not with rulers or formulas, but with gentleness. This is a story about a design that was never printed on paper, but became a real home. Built not with concrete, but with trust and the tiniest of things. So join us as we follow the love story of a librarian and an architect, not one that began with love at first sight, but with a simple question: why do you look at the dome like it doesn't know how to breathe? If your heart feels just a little softer by the end of this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. Now then, let's begin. That afternoon, the sky hung heavy and gray, as if it wanted to swallow the whole city in rain. While most people rushed home, the 12th floor of the towering glass building that housed Wyatt's studio, one of the top architecture firms in the country, still blazed with light. The fourth technical meeting of the day showed no sign of ending. The sharp clink of a coffee cup hitting the table pierced the tense atmosphere. This is absurd. No structure could possibly stand with force distribution like that, barked an older engineer, eyes locked on the drawing projected on the large screen. We've tried everything: static and dynamic load models. Nothing works. The dome can't carry the weight without breaking the facade, added the youngest member of the team, his voice worn with fatigue. Meanwhile, on the ground floor, Nora Bennett was gathering books inside the public library connected to the studio's workspace. She was a part-time librariana woman in her early 30s, with chestnut hair always tied in a neat bun and eyes that knew how to smile and how to grow quiet. This wasn't her usual post, but today, the library had been asked to assist Wyatt's studio in locating old texts on Gothic architecture for a European restoration project. And she was the only one who truly understood the material. "Excuse me? Do you know where the engineers from the 12th floor left the old architectural blueprints?" she asked the receptionist, who directed her to a temporary research room. The room was mostly empty. Only the large screen still glowed, casting light on a complex structure drawing with tangled lines and technical annotations. No one had asked her to do anything, but Nora, driven by her natural curiosity and love for classical architecture, stepped in quietly, set the books down, and looked up. "A triple-layered dome," she whispered. On the screen was a massive dome structure, seemingly inspired by old European cathedrals, but trapped within the limits of modern engineering. The force calculations refused to balance, and it was driving the entire engineering team to frustration. Nora sat down, opened the stack of reference blueprints, and pulled out a pencil. She began sketching on a photocopy, her brows furrowing, as if trying to recall something long buried. "This isn't new," she murmured with a faint smile. "The Romans used this trick to convert lateral force into vertical pressure. But they didn't call it engineering, they called it intuition." In just a few minutes, she adjusted the curve of the dome into an inverted catenary shape and added a small, seemingly insignificant component, a lightweight wooden tie beam across the center. It looked simple, but when she ran the calculations through the digital tool left on the table, the result was flawless. "Oh, is this real?" Before she could celebrate, the door behind her opened. She turned and found herself face to face with a man, tall, with a straight posture. He wore a plain white dress shirt that did little to hide the quiet authority of someone used to being in charge. His face was striking, his eyes sharp but not unkind. This was Gabriel, Wyatt's CEO and chief architect of Wyatt's studio. He stared at her for a moment. "What did you just do?" Nora jumped to her feet, slightly flustered. I just made a few adjustments. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. No, I'm not upset. I'm just trying to understand how 6 of my best engineers couldn't solve this in 2 weeks, and you just did it in 6 minutes. They stood in silence for a beat, the soft sound of rain tapping against the large glass window, the only thing filling the room. What's your name? He asked. Nora Bennett. I'm a librarian from the South Wing Library. Gabriel glanced back at the drawing she'd altered. Tomorrow, 9A.M. 12th floor meeting room. I want you to present this to my engineering team. Bah! Not an architect exactly, he said. That's what makes what you did worth listening to. Nora didn't reply. She simply nodded, her lips curving into a quiet smile, the smile of someone who had long believed she was just a keeper of books. Now standing at the edge of a door she never knew existed, a door she never imagined would take her so far. The next morning, at exactly 8:55 a.m., Nora Bennett stepped out of the elevator onto the 12th floor. She paused in front of the frosted glass doors leading into the main conference room, reserved exclusively for Wyatt Studios' senior architects. Every one of her steps seemed to echo, carrying a mix of nerves and uncertainty. The light blue visitor badge hanging around her neck, reading Visitor Nora Bennett, felt embarrassingly simple against the sleek and polished surroundings. Along the walls, massive prints of grand architectural designs were displayed, each annotated with precise, intricate technical notes in clean handwriting. Everything about this place spoke of professionalism, precision, and prestige. And she was just a librarian, someone who had accidentally solved a problem that a team of experts hadn't cracked in weeks. I could just turn around, say I got sick, she muttered to herself, but then she sighed. Come on, Nora, you're already here. At least find out what they want. The glass door opened as she gave it a gentle knock. A young assistant in a pale gray suit stood up to greet her. Miss Bennett, please come in. Mr. Wyatt is expecting you. The meeting room was bright with white overhead lighting. Beyond the glass walls, the skyline of Seattle lay misty and damp. More than a dozen people sat around a long, walnut conference table, mostly men, with just one female architect in a black blazer seated near the front. They were dressed in shirts and ties, laptops and tablets at hand, and all eyes turned toward the newcomer. Gabriel Wyatt stood near the large screen, holding a presentation remote, and turned as he heard the door. Today, he wore a navy suit and a white shirt, no tie. His quiet confidence made him stand out even more than the tailored room around him. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod. Good morning, Ms. Bennett. Please, have a seat. The silence in the room was so complete. Nora could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. She stepped forward, set her small canvas bag beside the chair, and sat down. Folding her hands in her lap like a student summoned to the principal's office, Gabriel began. Last night, one of the engineering problems that's held our team back for 3 weeks was solved, not by software, not by a consultant from New York, but by someone not even on our staff, Ms. Nora Bennett. A few brows furrowed. The female architect tilted her head slightly, intrigued. A senior engineer, with graying hair, flipped through a digital model on his tablet. We've reviewed it. The way she adjusted the force lines and redistributed the load center is completely accurate. Not only that, simplifies the entire structural support system for the roof. Gabriel turned toward her. Ms. Bennett, would you mind explaining what you did? Nora swallowed. She had no slides, no diagrams, just her memory on the pencil she had brought from the library. I just thought. All the force lines were converging at too narrow a point, which was creating pressure buildup at the base. She began, sketching on a sheet of paper as she spoke. In old French cathedrals, they solved this by adding external support arches flying buttresses to distribute the weight. But here, I tried inverting the main dome curve into a reverse parabola, so the load could spread more evenly across the outer columns. She paused, realizing she was rambling in front of a room full of KT and living of seasoned professionals. Sorry, I've just read a lot of books. I've never actually designed anything. Gabriel cut in gently but firmly. Knowledge doesn't care whether you hold a pen or a broom. And here, your knowledge is invaluable. The room fell into a thoughtful silence. Then the silver-haired engineer spoke, his voice deep. "Did you study architecture?" Nora gave a small shake of her head. "I studied Western cultural history, but I took a minor in architectural history during my first 2 years of college. Then my mom got sick, so I left school. I've been working at the library ever since." Someone else asked, "So you've read all those materials just out of passion?" "Because I wanted to understand," Nora said without hesitation. A quiet laugh rippled through the room, not mocking, but amused and surprised. The female architect smiled and gave her a small, approving nod. Gabriel turned back to address the room. "This isn't a hiring meeting, but I'd like to try something new, Ms. Bennett, if you're willing. I'd like to invite you to join this project as a part-time consultant at least through the structural phase." Silence settled. Again, Nora's eyes widened. "You mean me?" "Yes, you can continue working at the library. We'd only ask that you attend 1 meeting per week and review the structural designs we send your way. Naturally, with fair compensation. I believe your outside perspective is exactly what this project needs." Nora sat still for a moment. This wasn't the dream she'd once had. She had never imagined herself inside a major firm, much less sitting across from a CEO, not as someone dusting the shelves, but as someone asked to contribute, and maybe that's why when the dream arrived, it felt all the more beautiful. "All right," she said, nodding softly, a smile forming on her lips. "As long as I can bring my pencil and, occasionally, some cookies. I think better when I eat cookies." The room erupted in laughter. Gabriel smiled too, rare, unguarded smile that softened the sharp lines of his face. "Then welcome to Wyatt's studio, Ms. Bennett. And if you can, bring enough cookies for the whole room next week. I'll consider it," Nora replied, a mischievous glint in her eyes as she stepped out of the meeting room. Seattle's sky was still draped in its usual gray, but inside her, a small light had begun to flicker, not because of the opportunity, but because, for the first time, someone didn't see her as a keeper of books, but as someone who held knowledge that mattered, and somewhere between the 12th floor and the scribbled notes, something else had quietly touched her, to the gaze of a man who didn't just see a solution, but saw the one who solved it as worth a second look. Tuesday morning, exactly 8:45 a.m. Nora Bennett arrived on the 12th floor, just as she'd promised. The sun was out, a rare sight in Seattle during spring. Nora wore a simple white blouse, brown khaki pants, and her worn-out gray sneakers, ones she'd worn countless times at the library. She hadn't tried to dress like anyone else. Truth be told, she didn't know how to dress like anyone else. In her hands was a box of homemade cookies, wrapped in parchment paper and tied with twine. "I said I'd consider it." She smiled to herself as she stepped into the elevator. "Well, I did." When the doors opened, the hum of busyness surrounded her. People moved briskly with tablets in hand. Large blueprints spread across drafting tables, and the soft whir of a printer echoed in the back corner. Yet as she entered, something shifted, not because of her presence, but because of what she brought with her. No button-down shirt, no laptop, no jargon-laced chatter about tension loads and stress points. Just a girl with a soft smile, the scent of butter cinnamon cookies, and a presence that somehow made the air feel a little less tense. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett." The female architect from last time, Megan, waved warmly. "Hi, I brought cookies. I hope no one's allergic to butter as long as there's sugar. I'll eat every last one." A middle-aged engineer called out, making the team chuckle. Just then, Gabriel Wyatt stepped out of a smaller meeting room. He was dressed exactly the same as the day before, light blue shirt. Sleeves neatly rolled up, hair slicked back like not even the Seattle wind dared to mess with it. He looked like someone who always knew exactly what he wanted. But the moment his eyes met Nora's, his steps slowed just a little. "Cookies?" he asked, in a tone somewhere between teasing and serious. "Yes, cinnamon and almond. But I'm not sure they meet the technical standards of this office, as long as they don't compromise the structural integrity of the break room." He replied lightly and turned away. But the smile that flashed in his eyes lingered with Nora longer than it. Should have the meeting began promptly at 9 a.m., Nora was invited to sit at the end of the table next to Megan and a young engineer named Luis, who looked slightly flustered when Nora asked to borrow a pencil. She didn't say much, but every time a diagram appeared on the screen, her eyes followed it carefully like she was reading a faded page from an old 18th century book, smudged with a stranger's pencil marks. At one point, the team was debating why a corridor support beam was misaligned by a few centimeters from the design axis. Nora raised her hand. "Excuse me, I was just wondering why not reuse the sliding symmetry solution from the Scala Theater in Milan. I remember they faced a similar issue back in the 19th century when expanding the roof without relocating the main columns." The room went quiet. Gabriel tilted his head toward her Scala. "Do you have the drawings for that?" "I have a book at the library," Nora answered, a little shyly. "You'd like? I can send over a scanned copy this afternoon," Luis whispered. To Megan, "Is she like a walking encyclopedia or something?" Megan chuckled softly. "No, she's what we've all forgotten we need, a person who truly loves architecture." After the meeting, Gabriel caught her in the hallway. "Nora, got a minute?" She turned back to face him. "You were spot on about Scala today. We checked the 3D model, and if we apply the principle you mentioned, it could save us nearly 3 days of work." "That's great. I didn't think it would actually apply in real-life execution." "And you've also changed the mood of the team. Cinnamon and almond vibes." She teased, double quotes, "No. The kind of vibe that reminds people creativity doesn't have to be so serious that we forget to breathe." She looked at him not with shyness this time, but with genuine appreciation. "Thank you for giving me a chance," she said. Gabriel didn't respond right away. His gaze lingered on her face longer than necessary. In that moment, it seemed like he was considering something, but in the end, he simply said, "This Friday, the team's having a casual dinner at Engels, just to celebrate wrapping up the first phase of the project. If you're free, we'd love for you to join." Nora blinked. "Really? I thought this was just a temporary contract." "It's an informal dinner," he said. "And no one there needs to prove anything. You just need to be yourself." She hesitated. "Then can I wear a sweater and bring cookies?" "As long as you share the cookies with me," he replied, this time with a smile she could finally see clearly. It wasn't a gentle smile, but it was real, like those tiny details in an old blueprint that everyone overlooks, but in truth are what keep the whole structure standing. That evening, the air was crisp but dry. A rare kindness from Seattle in this season. The kind of weather that felt like the world was making a quiet exception. Nora stood in front of the glass doors of Engel's restaurant, hesitating. She wasn't used to places like this. Warm golden light spilled onto the stone sidewalk, and through the window, she could see suits and cocktail dresses glittering under chandeliers, the clink of glasses and the soft buzz of elegant laughter. Inside, people knew what to say, when to laugh, which fork to use first. She, on the other hand, had spent her entire afternoon helping reorganize the old book archive at the library. There was still a faint scent of dust and paper on her sleeves. She wore a light lavender dress borrowed from her roommate, not too flashy, but just enough to make her feel not quite herself. Her hair was down for once, rather than in its usual bun. She wore a hint of pink-tinted lip balm and a pair of old ballet flats she hadn't touched in years. Looking at her reflection in the glass, she let out a long breath. It's just dinner, Nora. Not a job interview. Not the college graduation you never got to attend. She murmured to herself and pushed the door open. The first thing that hit her was the smell of roasted meat. Warm buttered bread and a faint trace of wine mixed with soft background music. And the gentle hum of conversation. Toward the back, a group sat around a long table. Familiar faces from the meeting room. Someone spotted her and waved. Nora, over here. Megan stood up and pulled out a chair beside her, grinning. Oh my God, you look amazing. I almost didn't recognize you. Oh, thank you. I'm not sure I'd really fit the vibe here. You fit better than anyone I know, Megan whispered. Then added with a knowing glance, and someone else seems to think the same. Nora turned. Gabriel Wyatt was standing at the bar in the back of the room, dressed in a black shirt and a gray suit, a glass of red wine in hand. He was looking at her not with curiosity, not with appraisal, but with something deeper. Something that made people glance away to hide their blush or freeze in place. Too afraid to move, Nora chose to turn back toward Megan. I brought some cookies, she said quietly. Not sure they go well with ribs and fruit cocktails. At this table, your cookies go with everything, said Louise from across the table. The group laughed, and the mood lightened. Chatted about the project, silly drafting errors, and the time the lead engineer almost sent a blueprint to a rival firm. Nora didn't talk much, but when she did, the table fell quiet. Not because she was funny, but because she said things that felt true. Little stories about a small chapel in Florence she'd once read about, a wooden-roofed library in England, where ink pens were banned, or the first time she realized a column could be beautiful, not just because it was straight, because it made the person beneath it feel uplifted in that warm air. Gabriel stepped away from the bar and walked over. The room seemed to shift, almost imperceptibly. Some wind moved a chair. Someone switched their drink to the other hand. No one said anything, but space was made, as if they all knew this moment wasn't for interruption. Good evening, Miss Bennet, he said, eyes fixed on her. Good evening, Mr. Wyatt. She replied with a small nod. Call me Gabriel. Oh. One uses last names here. All right, Gabriel, she said. The name felt strange on her tongue. He stood for a beat, then asked, Do you like this place? I think I like the way people here look at me. Like I belong here, even though I know I don't. Gabriel set his wineglass on the table and sat across from her. You're wrong, he said slowly. You belong anywhere your mind finds meaning. His words surprised her not because they were poetic, but because they felt so real, as if someone had seen right through her. Megan quietly excused herself to chat with someone else. The others gradually shifted their focus to another conversation. Down the table, it was just Gabriel and Nora Noand, the hush that settled between them. He gestured toward a plate of cookies wrapped in a napkin. May I try one? She nodded and opened the bundle. This one has ginger. I tried a new recipe. Might be a little spicy. He took a bite, chewing thoughtfully, then looked at her. Just like you, excuse me? But with a surprising kick, Nora laughed for the first time that night, freely and without restraint. When the dinner ended, everyone made their way out to the sidewalk. Gabriel was the last to exit, holding the door for her. May I walk you home? He asked, his voice softer than usual. She looked at him, then gently shook her head. I'm taking the bus. And tonight I want to walk a bit. You sure? Yeah, she smiled. I need a little time to savor the ginger. He nodded, not pushing. Well then, good night, Nora. Good night, Gabriel. As she turned and walked away, her ballet flats brushed gently against the stone pavement. He stood there, watching until her figure disappeared beneath the glow of the streetlights. And for one of the rare times in his life, he wasn't thinking about blueprints or buildings. He was thinking about a woman with a real smile, bright eyes, and the taste of ginger still lingering on his tongue. Monday at Wyatt Studio felt different after that dinner, as if the world had shifted half a step to the side, just enough to make you feel something had changed. Even if you couldn't explain why, Nora arrived on time, as always. A hardcover book on Italian Renaissance architecture tucked under her arm, borrowed from the special archive. But today, as she stepped into the elevator, her heart skipped slightly. The doors opened and Gabriel was already inside. He stood, leaning casually against the wall, hands in the pockets of his tailored slacks, eyes focused on his phone. As the doors closed, he looked up and saw her. One beat of silence. "Good morning, Nora." "Morning, Gabriel." The elevator doors slid shut behind her. They were the only two inside. The low hum of the elevator motor filled the space. The floor indicators blinked mechanically as they passed. Nora clutched the book tighter in her arms and tilted her head slightly upward, looking at the ceiling, avoiding his gaze, but unable to hide the flicker of nervousness in her posture. Gabriel, on the other hand, looked directly at her. "Is that about Umbria-style architecture?" he asked softly. "Yes, I was thinking of suggesting a simpler vaulted ceiling for the north gallery. A shallow arch with deep grooves would reflect natural light more efficiently." He smiled. "You know, Nora, you're the only person I know who can talk about vaulted ceilings like they're part of a fairy tale." She chuckled softly and turned toward him. "That's because they feel like one to me, like domes that have shielded people through storms and sun for centuries while no one ever thinks about the hidden layers holding them up." "And you?" he asked, his voice dropping into a lower register. "Who held you up?" The question caught her off guard, not because it was personal, but because he genuinely wanted to know. She paused for a moment. "My mother," she said. "Even though she's no longer here, I still feel like I'm living out a part of the dream she once had. Every book I turn, every drawing I study, it's like I'm telling her I'm still going." Gabriel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I had someone like that too, but I let them slip away." Nora looked up. Eyes met his, this time without looking away. "Why? Because I thought I had to succeed first. I told myself once I made it, I'd go back for them." He gave a quiet, bitter smile. "But when I finally turned around, they were gone." Suddenly, the elevator jerked. A soft clicking sound echoed, then everything stopped. The overhead light flickered, then switched to a dim emergency mode. The elevator was still. Nora looked around, gripping her book slightly tighter. Probably just a technical glitch. Gabriel pressed the emergency call button. "Stay calm. We'll be out soon." She nodded, trying to seem composed. He glanced at her, then asked, "Are you scared?" She let out a faint laugh. "Oddly, no. I feel kind of calm. Maybe because we're in a closed geometric structure, no exit, but also no one else barging in. Like a perfect model that doesn't need fixing." He smiled, not out loud, but truly, for the first time, relaxed. "Do you always think in shapes like that?" "Not always. But when I don't know how to feel, I think in lines and forms, like how people draw hearts when they don't know how to say love." They sat on the floor of the elevator. Gabriel leaned against the wall, Nora cradling the book in her lap. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, just well-timed. After a few minutes, Gabriel spoke softly. "Nora, have you ever wondered what would have happened if you hadn't walked into the research room that day?" "I have," she said. "I'd still be at the library, still reading, still living a quiet life, full in its own way. And now, so looked up. Now everything feels bigger, but also more fragile. Gabriel nodded. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Are you afraid of me?" She froze for a second. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I'm afraid the distance you keep isn't just politeness. I'm afraid you think I'll hurt you." She looked at him for a long time and said quietly, "I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of feeling something I'm not sure I'll be brave enough to follow. Now, I've never been part of this world, your world, and I don't know if there's room for someone like me in it." "Then let me be clear," he said, his voice steady. "Gabriel, it's not because I'm a CEO, and it's not just because you're brilliant. It's because from the first moment you talked about domes, I knew you see the world in a way no one else I've ever met does, and he stopped mid-sentence. Maybe even he was afraid of going too far." She didn't say anything, but her gaze that wasn't agreement, wasn't rejection, was simply listening. Just then, the lights flickered back to life. The familiar hum of the elevator resumed. A moment later, the doors opened. The 12th floor hallway appeared as usual, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Gabriel stood and held out his hand to her. "Come on." She placed her hand in his, not saying a word, but not pulling away either. That touch wasn't a declaration. It was simply, "I heard you. And maybe, just maybe, I want to hear more." Ever since that day in the elevator, something between Nora and Gabriel had quietly shifted. Neither of them said anything. No change in how they addressed each other. They went about their work as usual, Nora at her temporary desk in the corner of the in-house library. Gabriel coordinating the lead architecture team, moving between meetings. But sometimes their eyes would meet through the glass walls, and just a simple nod would be enough to send Nora's heart skipping a beat. Still, everything remained unspoken, like a sketch not yet colored in. A building not yet granted a construction permit, until one afternoon, when Nora stumbled upon a misplaced folder in the technical archive. It was the latest design package for the ArcLine Studio's flagship undertaking for the year, set to become the largest contemporary art center on the West Coast. She hadn't meant to snoop. It was just librarian instinct, put things back where they belong. But as she flipped open the first page, her eyes froze on the credits. Chief Concept Advisor, Helen Lin. Her, the former design team leader. Gabriel's ex. The woman who had left Wyatt's studio 2 years ago to work in Europe, and who, according to breakroom gossip, had been invited back exactly 1 month ago, just as ArcLine was gearing up for launch. Nora sat still, her hand resting on the edge of the folder. The problem wasn't just the name Helen, it was this. The core design, its sweeping arch structure that reflected natural light, had been Nora's idea. She'd proposed it in a meeting 3 weeks ago. She never asked for credit, never expected to be on any list. But what tightened her chest was that no one had even asked. No one had told her. She'd been overlooked, or worse, replaced. At that moment, Gabriel walked into the archive room. "Nora, I've been looking for." He stopped when he saw her expression. "Is something wrong?" She stood, not meeting his eyes. "This file," she said, pointing to the folder. "Is this the finalized version?" Gabriel nodded. "Yes, the board approved it this morning. We're about to send the technical package to the partners, and Helen Lin is listed as the official advisor." "Yes." She nodded, a faint smile curving not from joy. "Even though the conceptual framework is based on the model I presented." Gabriel hesitated. "Nora, I no need to explain." She cut him off, voice low but sharp. "I understand. She's the former lead. The one with the name. The one you don't," he said quietly. "Whatever was between me and Helen, it's in the past, but her name is in the present time." She walked out before he could say anything more. The door closed behind her with a soft but clean break. Later, she sat in the library, tucked into the quietest corner between two shelves. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her laptop, but her eyes stayed fixed on the screen, like she was trying to fill a void that had just opened inside. She wasn't angry about the missing credit. She was angry because she'd believed a belief that whatever existed between her and Gabriel, even if it had never been defined, was real. That the glances, the long conversations, that moment in the elevator were not things he could share with someone else. But when it came time to choose whose name to place in the official box, he'd chosen Helen, not her. 2 days later, Nora submitted a formal request to end her consulting contract early. The email was polite, brief. The reason stated, to focus on full-time library responsibilities. She didn't mention Gabriel. She didn't ask for credit or rights to the design. But Gabriel knew. He read her email in silence. And for the first time in years, after dealing with calculations and blueprints accurate to the millimeter, he found himself unable to chart an exit. He had chosen Helen not out of sentiment, but because the board wanted a name with international recognition to help secure investors. And he had stayed silent when he should have spoken up. Now that silence had taken from him the only person who made the pressure feel bearable. The next morning, Nora left Wyatt's studio without saying goodbye. Only Megan caught her in the hallway, giving her a quiet hug and whispering, "If you ever need, I'll always make sure people know who really came up with the first solution." Nora smiled gently. "Thank you. But sometimes what we build doesn't show up on paper." She walked away, leaving behind a project in progressant, a man standing still at the 12th floor window, watching her go, as though everything he hadn't said had missed its moment forever. Since the day Nora left Wyatt's studio, Gabriel Wyatt realized he had grown more used to her presence than he had ever admitted to himself. Each morning, still stood by the 12th floor window with his usual cup of coffee. But something was missing. Not the scent of cinnamon cookies, not the soft musings about domes or spiral staircases. It was the quiet steadiness in her gaze, the way she could soften an entire tense room with a single question. What if we just simplified it? Helen Lynn, meanwhile, was downstairs attending the first press event for the Arcline project. She wasn't brought back because of old feelings, but because the board wanted her. She was a name that could appear on magazine covers. She was credibility made marketable. She was a safe option. And for years, Gabriel had chosen the safe option, until he met Nora. That afternoon, he called Megan into his office. "Do you still have Nora's concept sketch for the vaulted light design?" Megan blinked in surprise. "I thought you'd already signed off on Helen's version." "I did, but I want to compare. I need to remember exactly what Nora didn't, why it made the whole room go silent for 30 seconds before they clapped." Megan paused, then opened her tablet, scrolling through archived files until she found it and enabled screen share. "I kept it aside because I thought there was something in it too." Gabriel looked at the file. On the screen was an incomplete sketch pencil. Lines slightly smudged, handwritten notes in delicate slanted script. No logo, no name. Just a design that funneled light through angled grooves, converging at the apex of the dome, creating a fluid flowing light effect. A concept no one in the team had thought of. It towed of act. It talked of act, may it took. No long last team color. No logo, no lame, no lame. No lame, no lave. No lave, no lave, no lave. I see it, where I see it says it is. I'm above, by rememmet, my I regret by am lev. We is alive of I lies I have. We am I see they so it I to me I sigh it's I seek you to psychs I to get I sides it I sit it I get that Nora. Gabriel let out a slow breath. "What are you going to do?" Megan asked. He stood, grabbing his coat. "I'm going to find her." Nora had returned to working full-time at the South Hill Library. No more late-night shifts, no more project emails, no more finding ways to translate architectural terms into plain language. But also no more shared glances that made the air feel still. No more standing in silence beside someone who understood it. No more Gabriel. She'd never allowed herself to say. His name in her mind now, it echoed every time she closed a book with an arched ceiling on the cover. She thought he wouldn't come. Why would he? He had a building to finish, an ex-girlfriend, backed by the board, and a career path that needed no librarian to stay on track until that afternoon. She was reshelving a rare book collection when she heard slow footsteps approaching. She looked up and Gabriel was standing there. No suit, jacket. It's just a white shirt with sleeves rolled up. No briefcase. Just a notebook and an expression he made no effort to hide. Nora straightened, taking half a step back. "What are you doing here?" "Because I was wrong," he said without hesitation. She froze. He stepped closer, stopping at the front desk. "I chose the safe option, yes. But I gave up something I never should have the recognition owed to the person who truly deserved it. And I stayed silent when I should have spoken." Nora looked straight at him. For the first time, she didn't avoid his eyes. "You came to apologize." "Not only that, I came to return something to you. The design your vaulted-like concept. I updated the records. The board approved the revision. Your name will be on all official ArcLine documents." Her eyes widened, but Helen, she agreed. She said you created the foundation. She only developed the technical detail. Nora didn't know what to say. Her fingers brushed the edge of the desk. Gabriel continued. "But more importantly, I came to ask you something. Would you give me a chance, not just to work with you again, but to step into your life? Not as a CEO, not to fix the past, just as me." She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, voice low and steady, "What if I say no? Then I'll respect that. And I'll still always be grateful that you once stepped into my world." She looked up. Their eyes met, and this time there was nothing left to hide. She stepped out from behind the counter, standing in front of him, her hand still loosely holding a book. "If you want to step in, you should know, my world is full of dusty shelves, ink stains, and very few certainties." He nodded. "I'm not looking for certainty. I'm looking for something real." Nora smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in days. "Then come in." Gabriel smiled too, a smile soft as afternoon light slipping through a glass dome, and extended his hand, and this time she took it. No hesitation, no fear, because maybe now it was time to build something new. No blueprints needed, just truth. A week after their conversation in the library, Gabriel and Nora saw each other again for the first time. Not because of work, not for ArcLine, not for an apology, not for a design to review or revise. They met for something far simpler. Gabriel invited Nora to dinner. No restaurants, no round tables. "No one in a suit," he texted. "Just dinner, cooked by me. If you trust, I know how to use a stove." Nora read the message while reorganizing a stack of monographs on medieval architecture. She smiled, then replied, "I trust you. On one condition, no curry. I'm mildly allergic to turmeric." Gabriel wrote back, noted, "See you at 7. His apartment was on the 17th floor of a modern building. Extravagant, but neat and warm. When Nora stepped inside, what struck her wasn't expensive cologne, but the soft scent of sautéed garlic and fresh basil. She hadn't dressed up, just a simple olive green dress, her hair tied low, brown leather flats. No makeup, just a bit of tinted lip balm. Gabriel, waiting by the door, wore a gray V-neck sweater and dark khakis. He looked real. "I brought bread," she said, holding up a paper bag with a grin. "Then I'm giving you bonus points already," he said, taking it. "I made fresh tomato pasta. No curry. Promise." She laughed and stepped inside. The small kitchen was clean. A few green plants lined the windowsill. A stack of architecture. Books sat on the dining table, not decorative ones, but real books, dog-eared and scribbled with pencil notes. "You actually read these?" she asked, surprised. "After I met you, I started learning how to read slowly. Not to get somewhere, just to notice what I'd been missing." She didn't say anything, but her eyes softened. Dinner passed gently. No talk of work. No mention of Helen. No discussion of Arcline. They spoke of childhood Nora, shared summers by a lake town, where she and her mom would read through rainy afternoons. Gabriel told her about the first time he sketched with charcoal. At 14, simply because he wanted to redesign his grandparents' old wooden house. They talked about the smell of old library paper, how bread should be eaten warm from the oven, and how sometimes we miss a scent more than we miss a face. Their conversation flowed, soft and unhurried, like the desk lamplight glowing over a half-finished sketch on the wall. Later, Gabriel stood, opened a drawer, and handed Nora a leather-bound notebook. "I want you to have this." She opened it and saw sketches, unfinished, unpolished. But on the first page, written in his hand, "Not every structure is made of concrete. Some are kept alive by belief." She was silent for a long time. "When did you draw these?" she asked softly. "After you left. I thought if I couldn't rebuild the past, I could at least start recording what mattered. And I'm part of that." Gabriel looked at her, long and steady, then nodded. "You're the first person who ever made me want to draw, not for plans, or credit, or the board, but just because I wanted to hold on to the feeling." She didn't reply. She gently set the notebook down on the table. Then, slowly, she stepped closer to him, a little closer, until there was only one breath between them. Gabriel whispered, "Can I?" Nora met his gaze. "You don't have to ask," she whispered. "Just don't use a ruler this time. Just draw." He leaned down, and for the first time, they kissed, not feverishly. Not in a rush, but like two final pieces finally clicking into place in a structure built from silence, almosts, and things left unsaid. Later that night, Nora stood on the apartment balcony. The Seattle air was cool and still. Gabriel stood behind her, one hand resting on the railing, not touching her. "But not far. I'm not leaving the library," she said. "I know. And I'm not coming back to Wyatt as a consultant. Not because I'm angry, but because I need to build something else." "What kind of something?" She turned to him, smiling softly. "A life with balance, between passion and peace, between intellect and heart." Gabriel smiled too. "If you build it, can I maybe help carry the bricks?" "Just don't drop them on my feet," she laughed. And in the quiet Seattle night, they stood side by side, not as CEO and consultant, not as architect and advisor, but as two people who had once lost each other in a broken blueprint and now found each other in something no one could ever sketch: trust. 1 month after that evening in Gabriel's apartment, their relationship quietly shifted into something new. No fanfare, no announcements, no social media posts. They continued living their separate lives, doing their own work, going days without seeing each other. 2 rhythms, 2 worlds. But between those rhythms, they carved out a quiet space for each other. Nora never returned to Wyatt's studio, but she started showing up at small events in the local architecture community. she gave a talk at a public panel titled The Return of Classical Structure in Modern Design, and surprised everyone when nearly half the audience came from the tech world. "She makes architecture sound like poetry," someone said after. "Not a lecture, more like a story." Gabriel sat in the back row that day, saying nothing. But he kept a printed copy of her talk in his briefcase for the next 3 weeks. On a soft summer evening, as light rain fell across Seattle, Gabriel came to pick her up after her shift at the library. She walked out in a beige trench coat, arms wrapped around a folder, her hair slightly damped from the drizzle. He quickly held a gray umbrella over her head, getting one shoulder wet in the process. "Are you insane? Why didn't you wait inside?" she asked. "Because I wanted to be the first thing you saw when you stepped out." She looked at him, mockingly. "Did you learn that from a design textbook or a 90s rom-com?" "Neither," he said. "Since I met you, I've been learning to say what I feel before it's too late." She shook her head, laughing. That evening, Gabriel took her to his apartment not for dinner, but to show her something. A 2-size sheet of paper lay on the table. Most of it was still blank. In the center, a soft cluster of curved lines, like a bridge bending gently across to quiet breaths. "What is this?" Nora asked. "Not a building. Not a project proposal. Just something I sketched for one person to see." "Me?" he nodded. "I want to invite you to make this with me." Nora stepped closer, studying the paper. After a moment, she smiled faintly. "You just broke your own rule, remember? No one should step into a structure before they understand its foundation. Because this time, I believe the foundation is standing right in front of me." She didn't reply. She sat down, pulled a pencil from her bag, and without another word, drew a curve that connected to his lines, completing the unfinished arc. "A bridge," she said, "needs 2 pillars to stand. I won't walk ahead, but I won't stand behind either. Never." He sedoned within that single word, lived every promise that didn't need a signature. The following week, Gabriel received a nomination for the North American Emerging Architect Award and Honor, reserved for innovators under 40. A prestigious recognition. It's a kind that could open doors to major international projects. During the press conference, a reporter asked, "If selected, what project would you say best represents your design philosophy?" Gabriel paused, then answered slowly, "It's a design that's never been built, and maybe never will be. Not with concrete or glass." The reporter blinked. "Then what is it?" He looked directly into the camera. "It's a person, a librarian. Someone who taught me that architecture isn't always about building what's grand. Sometimes it's about stepping back just enough to see what's simple and true." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that comes only when someone has said something deeply personal and undeniably real. That night, Nora didn't call. She just sent one text, "I know." And Gabriel replied, "I know you know." There was no engagement party, no press release. But one afternoon in June, they visited a small piece of land by the lake where Gabriel had drawn his very first sketch at 14. They built a simple wooden frame and hung a single white board on it. On the board, it read, "For the one who taught me to build with trust, not just with drawings." And beneath it, Gabriel placed his hand gently over Nora's. He didn't say anything, because now he knew the most trustworthy things are often the ones that don't need to be spoken at all. 2 years later, the South Hill Library unveiled a new reading room filled with natural light, featuring gently curved ceilings and large windows that opened out to a small lavender garden. Under that light, children studied, adults read, and elderly patrons occasionally dozed in armchairs. No one quite knew who had designed the space. The official plaque simply read, "Sponsored by the Wyatt Foundation in collaboration with the community." But anyone who had worked in architecture could tell. The gentle curve bore the unmistakable style of Gabriel Wyatt, and it was Nora Bennett who had drawn the very first sketch. On a scrap of paper while sipping ginger tea by the window, they didn't move into a modern designer home. Instead, they bought a red brick fixer-upper on the outskirts of Seattle, abandoned. Old bookshop. Gabriel restored it himself, no hired crew. No fancy 3D modeling software. "I want to touch every brick with my own hands," he said. Nora repainted the bookshelves. She wiped dust from each wooden ledge, picked curtain colors to match the seasons, and kept an old sign hanging on the wall that read, "Here, every book is a doorway." Their living room had no television, just a rotating bookshelf, an old upright piano, and a small tea table beside a worn olive-green armchair. Each night, they read aloud to each other or simply sat in silence, each in their own corner of it. Together, no one mentioned Arcline anymore. The project had succeeded. But for Gabriel, the most important structure was no longer in the heart of the city. It was in the details of daily life. One crisp autumn morning, Nora tucked a small piece of paper into the pocket of Gabriel's shirt. On it was a single sentence. "What do you think about adding another little room?" Gabriel read it and turned to her. "You mean?" She nodded, and he didn't say anything. He just held her, not too tightly, but enough for her to know. This time, they would build. Not from fear, not from expectation, but from love, deep enough that it needed no blueprint. The following April, their baby girl was born. They named her Lucia, Italian for light. On Lucia's first birthday, Gabriel gave Nora a sketch, not of a house, not of a building, but a hand-drawn storybook. It told of a man who traveled the world searching for the perfect. Brigand eventually found it in the smile of a woman reading in the corner of a small library. On the final page, the woman took his hand. Together with their curly-haired child, they walked across a soft-arched bridge. Beneath them, the water didn't rush. It moved quietly like time, like peaceful days after a storm. Nora turned each page slowly, her lips gently pressed together. When she reached the end, she looked up and whispered, "I never dreamed of who I would be in this life. But if I could choose again, I'd still be a librarian. And I'd still choose you." Gabriel didn't answer, because some thank you can only be spoken by living each day fully. Their story didn't have a neat ending, because they didn't need one. They only needed to wake up each morning, knowing the person beside them was someone who had once helped them survive cracks no one else could see, and that small home where sunlight filtered through old wood-framed windows, where the sound of turning pages echoed softly through still afternoons stood as proof that some structures can't be measured in square footage. They are measured in trust and love, the one thing that needs no blueprint to stand the test of time. And just like that, our story comes to a close. But I have a feeling the emotions are still lingering, like the last traces of light filtering through a domed glass ceiling. The love between Nora and Gabriel didn't begin with grand confessions or sweeping gestures. It started with quiet footsteps, small acts of kindness, and a kind of trust built slowly by to patient hands. Maybe all of us, at some point, have felt like we don't belong in the dazzling world around us. But then someone comes along, not to pull us away, but to build a quieter world with us. Not grand, not loud, just real. Thank you for staying with us all the way through this journey. If something in this story gently touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. You can share the city you're watching for more. Just drop an emoji. I read every single one. See you in the next story, where love may arrive slowly, but always, always arrives true.